Well, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to episode 90 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. It's also the second election special. So we're broadcasting live at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Tuesday, the 6th of June, 2017. In approximately 40 hours from now, the polling stations will open in the UK. And an election will get underway that is quite possibly the most seminal and crucial election of my lifetime. We weren't expecting one, of course, because Theresa May had stated categorically that she wasn't going to call an election, but once again, she's proven that not a word that comes out of her mouth has any relationship with fact or truth. So here we are, and she has put her neck on the proverbial block, and we have to take this as an opportunity and maybe see it as an absolute gift. Well, yesterday's program caused quite a lot of discussion and debate, particularly as I am unabashedly recommending that people seriously consider the absolute essential need to put Jeremy Corbyn into number 10. As I said yesterday, never in my life have I ever encouraged people to vote for Labour. And if it was any other leader of the Labour Party, then I doubt I'd be making that statement now. But this is perhaps the one opportunity that people in the UK have to at least stem the tide of rampant corporatism that is sweeping over this country. And of course, events of the last 3 weeks have been intended, in my opinion, to further the Theresa May stroke corporatist agenda. And we're seeing this, obviously, as we discussed yesterday, with the increased presence of armed police on the streets, something that is unprecedented anywhere around the world right now. I mean, the US police certainly carry sidearms, but you rarely see them walking around the streets with automatic weapons, which is becoming increasingly familiar here in the UK. Well, another issue that is also very much on the table is that of unconventional gas exploitation, i.e. fracking. And I'm not going to dwell on that today. I'll be looking a little bit more at that tomorrow. But it is exactly 4 years ago that I was a little over halfway through my Fractured Future tour, 63 dates around the country, where I was attempting to sow the seeds and raise awareness of this threat. And this is very much to the fore of the election, although particularly the Tory party are trying to play it down, if not even ignore it, as is the mainstream media. But of course, the north of England is being horrendously targeted, with pretty much the entire central belt of the country under threat from unconventional gas exploitation, i.e. fracking. Well, 4 years ago, I'd just spoken the night before in Glasgow and was on my way to Edinburgh, to the event in Edinburgh. Had packed house in Glasgow and almost packed house in Edinburgh. And I have to say that both events in Scotland were most memorable. And I'd certainly like to express my appreciation for everybody who helped make those events and my visit to Scotland a very pleasant and memorable experience. Well, today the unconventional gas agenda has moved on, and we have a number of areas in the country, not least, of course, Preston Road, just outside Blackpool, Kirby Misperton in Yorkshire, possibly even York on the ring road right next to a children's play area, would you believe? And also in Sussex, in Billingshurst. And if you live in the southeast and you're not aware of what's occurring on the outskirts of Billingshurst right now, Broadford Bridge to be precise, then I suggest that you take a look at the attempt to establish an unconventional oil site at that beautiful location on the Sussex-Hampshire borders. Well, the most contentious issue that I raised yesterday appears to be the one of encouraging people to vote. And, the response from those people who stand strong in their belief that the right thing to do is not vote. And whilst I completely comprehend the sentiment, the reality is that, as we're going to see later on, changes don't happen by non-participation. Somewhere along the line, something has to be tickled, something has to be stimulated, seeds have to be sown. And sometimes, we have to take a bit of a gamble. And that's exactly what I'm really proposing here with the need to put Jeremy Corbyn into office. And I don't think people really perhaps perceive the magnitude of the difference between those at the top end of the social strata in the UK and those very much at the bottom end. So I want to kick off this afternoon's programme with a short video which looks at the wealth distribution in the UK. And what you'll see in this short video, I think, might make you realise that whatever you perceive is a long way short of the reality. So take a look at this.
In Britain, we take pride from living in a fair country. We believe that everyone should be given a chance in life to prosper through skill and hard work, whether as a care worker, shop assistant, soldier, civil servant, or company boss. However, is Britain as fair as it seems to be? How is wealth distributed in Britain today? Imagine the total wealth of the UK is £100. Now, imagine these people represent the population of the country. A new ICM poll asked 2,000 British people how this wealth should be distributed, from those with less wealth to those with more. As you can see, we think it's right that some people have more wealth than others. In a really fair Britain, we say, the richest fifth would have 25 of these coins. That's 25% of all the wealth, while the poorest fifth would have around 15. Even in our ideal world, some people will always have more than others. But we know we don't live in an ideal world. So next, the poll asked what we think is the actual distribution of wealth. As you can see, the results are quite different. We think that in Britain, the poorest fifth now has about 9% of the wealth, while the richest has more than 40%. That's £40 out of every 100. Doesn't seem very fair until you see what the real situation is. Not what we think it is, or how we think it should be, but how it really is. We can now see that Britain is not such a fair country after all. The fact is that the richest 20% have 60% of all the wealth. That's almost twice as much as everyone else put together, and 100 times more than the bottom 20% have. And the richest 1%? Well, they're off the scale. In fact, they have as much wealth as 60% of the population of the UK combined. As for the poorest fifth, if £100 were the total wealth, they would not even have a whole pound. Next to the richest fifth's £60, they would only have 60 pence. That's small change. This is the result of over 30 years of growing inequality. If this trend continues, it will be even harder to call Britain a fair country. Learn more at www.inequalitybriefing.org.
Well, when I discussed this issue yesterday, a number of people responded by saying, no, that can't be right. There's a far better, far more even distribution of wealth. Well, this is the reality, that even despite the alleged austerity, the reality is that the Tory government over the last 7 years has been spending inordinate sums of money, as we showed yesterday, increasing the national debt from just under £1 trillion when they took office in 2010 to nearly 1.7 trillion today. So increasing the national debt by 70%. Meanwhile, forcing an increasing number of people into poverty, which people accepted because they thought that this was necessary to get the country back on its feet. Well, the Tories, of course, will also claim that unemployment is falling, and this is the most recent chart that I can find, which shows that, of course, unemployment really started to rise in the aftermath of the global financial collapse. And then things got back on their feet around about mid-2008, 2009. And then unemployment seemed to rise a little bit as the Tories came into power. But then it tapers off. But yet there's something not right about this. There's something that doesn't correlate. And that's the fact that the phenomenal increase in the number of people using food banks, now estimated to be in excess of 500,000 people. And this is a statistic provided by the Trussell Trust, who operate a number of the food banks. And this is the number of people, what you're seeing on the screen now is the number of people who received a minimum of 3 days emergency food from the Trussell Trust food banks. And you can see that even in the aftermath of the global financial collapse, I mean, it doubled to 25,000, nearly 26,000, rising to just over 40,000 when Gordon Brown was in office. But then David Cameron comes into office, introduces austerity, yet spending money like it was going out of fashion. But of course, they knew how to pluck the magic money tree. And the number of people who were forced into the degree of poverty that necessitated them taking food from the food banks has risen from 61,000 when he came into office to over 500,000 today, nearly 350,000 when this was published a couple of years ago. So the Trussell Trust estimated 2 years ago, 3 years ago now actually, that some 4.7 million people were living in food poverty. I'm going to suggest that today is probably pushing 750,000 people. So how is this? Where is the mismatch between rising employment, falling unemployment, yet an increase in poverty? Well, consider the probability that it's linked directly to people employed on 0 hours contracts. Now, 0 hours contracts have been around now for a couple of decades or so, and there is no question that for some people, 0 hours contracts work. Now, it's estimated that something, pushing 1 million people employed on 0 hours contracts, and the average number of hours worked on a 0 hours contract is about 22.5 hours a week. And that works for some people. But of course, it's not providing a living wage to the vast majority. And yet people who are on 0 hours contracts employment are not classified as unemployed. And this has contributed very, very significantly to pushing people into poverty. And it's also contributing significantly to widening the wealth gap in this country. And those who just get richer and richer and richer, they have zero social conscience. It's all very well them donating to charities, but in most cases, by donating to charities, you're just feeding the fat cat executives who head up those charities. In fact, some of the compensation packages for the larger charities are very much on a similar par of people working in the corporatocracy. And so a significant chunk of any donation that's made to charity is simply just going around the circuit and going to the revolving door of CEOs as they go from public to private to public to NGO sectors. So not only have we got a problem of distribution of wealth, we're also getting a problem in terms of distribution of income. As people at the bottom end of the social strata struggle to earn enough to keep food on the table and a roof over their head, whilst those at the top end are increasing their income at such a rate that they can now afford to run 3, 4, 5 yachts, multiple jets, have multiple properties around the planet because they're all right, Jack. And I can say this. I can say this without fear of contradiction because in the past, in my corporate life, then yeah, I lived a pretty nice lifestyle. But it's shallow, especially when one acknowledges that there's a hell of a lot of other people who are considerably less fortunate through no fault of their own, through the fact that they have a government that actually doesn't give a damn, and in fact would rather they just rolled off and died. And we'll talk about that in a little while. But I want to show another short video because in this video I want to show the magnitude of the discrepancy in wealth distribution, because once again, very, very few people have any comprehension of how enormous this gap is.
Everywhere, people are paid differently for their work. What we are paid rewards skill, training, and experience, as well as the types of work we do. But how big should those differences be between those at the top and the rest of us? And are very large pay gaps good for society and our economy? Let's focus on two people. Brenda is an experienced nurse in one of Britain's busiest hospitals. After several years moving up her pay scale, she earns £12 an hour, the average wage in the UK. Brian is the boss of one of Britain's biggest companies. He earns £1,200 an hour. That's 100 times more than Brenda earns. In fact, that means Brian makes as much in just 3 days as Brenda earns in a whole year. Brenda struggles to get by on what she gets paid. Wages for average earners like Brenda have hardly changed in a decade, whilst food prices are going up, gas and electricity bills are rising, and rents are going through the roof. Brian, on the other hand, has seen his annual pay increase by £2 million over the same decade. That means he now earns 4 times as much in 1 year as Brenda will in her entire life. Doesn't seem very fair, does it? The fact is, for the first time, most people in poverty in the UK are actually in work. Growing numbers of working people struggle to pay the bills and now resort to food banks just to survive. And as people on average incomes are increasingly squeezed, less money is spent in our high streets. The growing pay gap between pay at the top and pay for everyone else is bad for those who earn the least, bad for average workers like Brenda, and bad for Britain's economy. And all the while, people like Brian do better and better. But it doesn't have to be like this. Other modern, successful European countries have prosperous societies with all the new technology and consumer goods that we enjoy in the UK. But in those countries, incomes are divided much more evenly. The super rich have a bit less than they do in the UK, but everyone else has a little more. If the total income of everyone in the UK was shared between the richest 1% and everyone else in the same way as it is in the Netherlands or Denmark, for example, 99% of us would be better off by nearly £3,000 a year per household. So, if we want to tackle poverty, we have to do something about inequality. Because higher incomes for some means lower incomes for others. Most people don't get their fair share because some are taking far more than their fair share. This is why it is essential for Britain to cut the growing pay gap between those at the very top and the rest of us. Learn more at highpaycentre.org and inequalitybriefing.org.
So some are taking more than their fair share. Now please, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I am certainly not a socialist in the traditional sense of the word. In fact, I'm very much a capitalist. But one of the things that I absolutely abhor is rampant corporatism. Genuine capitalism has a social conscience. Genuine capitalism rewards work it rewards effort, it rewards skill, it rewards expertise, and it doesn't demand that people work every hour under the sun just to earn enough money to keep food on the table and a roof over their head. But that's what corporatism does. Corporatism stifles ambition, it stifles ability, it stifles the desire to contribute, it stifles any social conscience in anybody, because everybody is forced to be dog eat dog just to earn enough to provide the basics for themselves and their families. And this is what we have to change. With Theresa May in office, or whomever it is that replaces her, and we'll look at that in more detail tomorrow. So the likelihood is that Theresa May is going to be forced to stand down regardless of whether she gets into number 10. She's a lame duck. She's proven to lack the intellectual capacity to lead the country, and certainly does not even have the basic wherewithal to interact with the voter in the street. So she will be replaced by somebody who is equally as incompetent. Elsewhere, I'm not suggesting for one moment that Jeremy Corbyn is the panacea to all of the issues and problems that the country faces. But there is a better chance of stemming the flow towards the rampant corporatist police state with Corbyn in office than there is with Theresa May. But as we've discussed previously, it will be very much dependent on the people, because it is the people who are Jeremy Corbyn's power base. We know there are those in the Labour Party, the Blairites, who are in some cases more right-wing than the Tories. We know they would like to see Corbyn removed, but the reality is that he has a growing groundswell within the country, because people can see that this disparity that exists within the social framework of this country cannot continue. And if it does continue, it's going to get very, very messy, and maybe sooner rather than later. So we have some other issues that we also have to take cognizance of, and that is also the age distribution in this country. And this graph on the screen here is a look at the age distribution in the country from 1971. This was actually produced in 2011, and extrapolating the age distribution through 2081. And what we're seeing is obviously an increasing percentage of the population in the over 50 bracket. And by 2081, we are potentially looking at 50% of the population, actually 50% of the population being over 65. But of course, by that time, retirement age will probably be about 80, and life expectancy will probably be pushing 100. But the corporatists are not interested in anyone that cannot make a direct contribution to the corporatocracy. Because for the corporatists, that is just literally dead meat. It's a waste of space. It's parasitical upon the corporate state. Yet, not only are we going to be looking at an increase in the age distribution, over the next 5 years, it is forecast that more jobs are going to be lost through automation than for any other reason. And in fact, Dr. Graham Downing delivered a truly outstanding presentation at AV8 a couple of weeks ago. And I'm sure that he will be repeating this presentation. If you get an opportunity to see it anywhere, I would encourage you to hear what Dr. Downing has to say. He's pulled some outstanding research together, but it's also being spelled out in the mainstream media. This is an article from earlier last year, in fact. This is almost 18 months old now. Robots and artificial intelligence will kill off 5 million jobs by 2020. And women will be the worst hit. And the subtitles here, reports claim that women will lose out as jobs concentrated in low growth or declining areas such as sales, office and administrative roles. 2/3 of losses will fall in the office and administrative sectors. Biggest negative losses will be in healthcare. Biggest negative losses, that means biggest gains. Gains will be in healthcare, as the health and well-being of people in the country deteriorates, as it is deteriorating now due to poor diet, poor lifestyle, pressures of work. So we're looking at an increase in employment in the healthcare sector, yet the National Health Service is being deliberately destroyed. And the likelihood is that people who are not in employment, many of them will not be able to afford private healthcare. So we are moving very much towards the corporatist healthcare model that exists in the US, where basically unless you have a private healthcare card or your credit or debit card has sufficient in the balance to be able to afford the enormous sums for even the most routine surgery or the most routine examination, then you'd just be left not even on the trolley, you'd just be dumped at the front door. And as I intimated yesterday, Jeremy Hunt was put into the role to lead the NHS towards privatisation, having co-authored a book on the subject almost a decade ago. And Noam Chomsky made the observation, he said, that's the standard technique of privatisation, to defund, to make sure things don't work, people get angry, and you hand it over to private capital. Well, there's something, again, that doesn't correlate here, because what we've seen, and again, now these numbers are actually a little bit out of date now, but the situation is even worse. And this is the amount of money that is spent on healthcare, and it is increasing, and it has increased through the years of the Tory government. So how is it that healthcare spending has increased, yet the quality of service has dramatically decreased, and the number of hospital closures is going exponential? And I think it's 19 hospital closures in the last 17 years, and more are scheduled to be announced, and particularly A&E units and maternity units, more are expected to be announced literally in the immediate aftermath of the general election. So sadly, this is becoming an increasingly common sign, and obviously, you know, the locals get up in arms about it, and there's local protests. But the attitude of the government is, you know, they'll get bored, they'll go away soon enough, and they'll learn to live with having to travel a bit further. Well, one of the hospitals that I believe is on the list, or some of the hospitals, are based in Surrey. St Helier Hospital, just outside Sutton, the Epsom Hospital. And if the hospitals aren't closed, then there are departments like A&E and maternity units that are very much at risk. And, you know, I have some relatively personal experience of this. You know, my daughter is a midwife at a very famous teaching hospital in the UK. She graduated in midwifery. She's a mature student. She graduated in midwifery around 2 years ago. And she was immediately offered a job at the teaching hospital where she did her training. So she's been on the payroll, the NHS payroll, for a little under 2 years. By the way, while she was studying, the NHS reduced the starting salary for their graduate midwives, which wasn't the best incentive. But over the last 18 months, she has witnessed the deterioration of the National Health Service, the increasing pressure that the full-time staff were put under. And finally, after 18 months, just 18 months, basically she's had enough. So she has currently resigned from the NHS, but won't be leaving the hospital because she'll be going on to the NHS Bank. And this is the system where people who have got the appropriate skills can be off the payroll, and they lose some benefits like pension and a bit of sick pay, a bit of holiday pay, but they get quite a significantly increased salary. So from a situation where she was forced to work an outrageous shift pattern, she can now go online to the NHS Bank and choose her shifts. And of course, what's happening here is this is deliberate. It's forcing people off of the NHS payroll into the private sector. And so consequently, what is happening is an ever-increasing amount of NHS funding is going into the private sector. And guess what? A significant chunk of the companies that provide private healthcare services or resource services to the NHS, they give enormous amounts of funding to the Tory party. So, once again, it's the power of the lobbyist. Here's the man, of course, who was put in charge of bringing about the demise of the NHS. And, this is coming at a time, as I said, when, the health, general health of people in this country is deteriorating at a phenomenal rate of knots. I'm not going to go through Jeremy Hunt's timeline of shame. If you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, then you can pause it and read it at your leisure. But this is a crucial one. The NHS record of the Tories over the last 7 years, 8,500 fewer specialist nurses, a similar number of fewer hospital beds, 72 outpatient centres closed or downgraded, 61 ambulance stations closed, 16% of accident and emergency units closed or downgraded, 9.1% of NHS funding has been cut per patient. It's now estimated that the NHS treats over 1 million people every 48 hours. The A&E wait times are well over 4 hours. They're at a 10-year high, and anybody who's experienced accident and emergency, casualty as it used to be known, then they know very well that in some cases you can be waiting there for 8 to 10 hours. 3 million plus now on hospital waiting lists, a 6-year high, with operations, particularly things like hip replacement operations, people in their 50s being told, oh, you're too young, and people in their 60s being told, oh, you're too old. It's a lottery wherever you happen to be living and dependent on the services available. 16 billion plus of NHS contracts are now tendered to the private sector. And here we go, 20 million plus of Tory donations are directly linked to the companies that are benefiting from that 16 billion. So, a bung to your favourite Tory MP, and in return they lobby to get the NHS services reduced so that they can step in and milk it. And the irony is that the bulk of the Tory voters are people who are probably going to need these services more than ever. Because as people get older, as their health deteriorates, very, very few of them are going to be able to afford the private healthcare costs. And basically, the NHS isn't going to be there for them. So to say that the NHS is in distress is an understatement. And not that I'm in the habit of quoting comedians or comedians, but here I have to say that Jo Brand, I think, pretty much sums it up. She says, the NHS is disappearing before our very eyes. If we are not vigilant, one of the greatest organisations in the world will not exist anymore. Any letting it go will be our fault. Which brings me right back to my key point of yesterday's programme. It's that 34% of people in the country who elect not to vote. And as I said, you may live in your nice bubble. You may feel that you've got it all sussed. You understand the language of the legalese, that you understand how to manipulate the financial system so that you don't have to worry about. You may feel that you've got private healthcare cover. You don't need to worry about the NHS. Well, I'm happy for you. But to not vote, if you have the opportunity to vote, to not vote in this election is an act of, selfish. I'm going to leave that. It's a selfish act. Because what you're doing is you are condemning a significant chunk of the population to potentially life under 5 more years of Tory rule and their quest to impose a rampant corporatist police state where you're a human resource. That's all you are, a human resource to be used, abused and discarded. And if you're not fit for work, then just get out of the way and die. And if you're not dying quick enough, then we'll remove the funding, we'll remove the healthcare, and we'll accelerate the process because you're a drain on the corporate state. So this is crucial. It's crucial. We have to bring about change. And everyone who says, yeah, but we're not going to bring about change by voting for Corbyn. We may not. We may not. We may just be stemming the flow until there's a critical mass of awareness that is ready to step up the plate and bring about the systemic change that we all know we need to see. So it's very clear that the Murdoch media is running scared. I mean, in fact, the vast majority of the British media are running hit piece after hit piece after hit piece. And whilst I must confess that I'm not particularly enamoured by the quality of the individuals that Corbyn has got access to put into positions of government, but nonetheless, here's a man who has proven consistently his values. He has proven that he has the wider interests of the British public at heart. Can he follow that through in office, in number 10? It's not going to be easy. And as I said earlier, his power base is going to be with the people. So all of these tens of thousands of people that are turning out to support Jeremy Corbyn, to see him speak in public, compared to the handful of people that turn out to support Theresa May. These people have to get involved in politics, not just on June the 8th, but for the next 5, 10, whatever years. Zbigniew Brzezinski said the biggest obstacle to establishing the one world government is the rapid political awakening of the masses. Let's make that happen on June the 8th. And for all those people who want to argue the toss about not voting, this is a crucial statistic. 34% of people did not vote in the last election. I think it's going to be less in this election because I know a very, very significant number of people have challenged their own beliefs and realised that this is time to actually contribute to bringing about a little bit of change in this country. And if I'm wrong, then hey, I'll be on point along with many others holding Jeremy Corbyn's feet to the fire. But that 34% is a significant chunk of the population of this country, more than 1/3. And yet the Tories got into office with their destructive policies with just 24% of the vote. So I'm going to close out today's programme with a party political broadcast on behalf of the Can't Be Arsed party. So I'll see you tomorrow. And by tomorrow, of course, will just be 18 hours from the opening of the polling stations and what is quite possibly the most significant general election of our generation.
Don't worry, I'm not actually urinating on number 10, but metaphorically, our party have been for years.
This is a party election broadcast that I can't be asked to watch.
You won't see us in the streets, you won't hear us on the radio, but we are Britain's biggest political party. The silent majority, the unheard third. We don't vote with our heads or with our hearts. We don't change our minds or float, and we don't go on and on about our opinions online because we don't vote. We're the CBA, and we can't be asked. This was the plan, but we couldn't be asked. So here we are on the battle bus. We've just left HQ, and now we're going to see if we can talk to some of our supporters.
I'm not voting.
You're not voting? Yes! You see?
But it's not because I can't be asked.
Why can't you be asked? Why?
It's because I don't know enough.
No, you
How do you-
should vote.
Why?
I don't know.
You interested in voting? Not at all? Excellent. No, I don't know any of the things.
Come on.
But
You
I
don't
can't...
know why.
Say, do you want to join the party? Can't be asked party.
No, not really. Not joining any parties.
You can't be asked.
No, I don't think so.
Hi there. Yeah, just wondering how you will be voting in the coming general election.
I ain't got time, you cockwomble.
Another one for the team.
Hello, sir. How will you be voting in the coming Another vote for the party.
Mind you, not everyone agrees with our policies. Yesterday, I spoke to someone who apparently knows exactly what he's talking about.
Is there an argument that if we just ignore all the problems in Britain, they might just go away?
Do you know, historically, that hasn't been the case.
The CBA is represented all over Britain and we're getting bigger and bigger. In Manchester in 2015, 56% of registered voters didn't vote. And most of them were young people, where they're sleeping in and endless podcasts. We're very proud of them. They're shaping this country's future without even lifting a finger. No, those are used to upload pictures of their food. Our manifesto is simple. Education, can't be asked. Immigration, can't be asked. Tax evasion, now this we do have a problem with. I'm only joking. We can't be asked to deal with anything. I haven't even written anything down. Troubled about Trident? Try, don't. Bothered about borders? No, it's boring. It only takes a couple of minutes to vote. But here's a list of things you could do instead.
Pick up a dog so it can see things from your point of view. Read a pamphlet, or simply make some disappointing love.
So join the CBA party today. It's easy, you don't have to do anything. The CBA party. Ignore Britain's problems and they might just go away.
Come on, be arsed. Vote on the 8th of June.